She believed she took everything from me, my trust, my dreams, even my hope. But what she didn't know was far darker, buried beneath the lies of her own world. And when her boss's secrets finally came to light, everything we thought we lost would be put to the test. My name is David, and I've spent the last 10 years working as a financial analyst in a mid-sized firm downtown. I'm the kind of guy who believes in hard work and keeping his head down. But none of that prepared me for the moment everything in my life seemed to shatter. It started with a phone call that morning. Sarah, my wife, sounded broken, her voice trembling as she told me the news. She was being accused of embezzlement at her job. It hit me like a punch in the gut. Sarah, the woman who trusted me with everything, now had her world crashing down around her, and somehow I felt powerless to stop it. She said she lost her job, her reputation, and worst of all, her self-respect. But what hurt me most was how she looked at me afterward, like I had let her down or maybe even betrayed her. I didn't tell her what I knew, what I had started to suspect about her boss. I kept silent because I thought it was better that way. Let her believe it was her fault, her mistake. Maybe she needed to fall first before things could get better. The apartment felt colder after that call. I sat alone in the dark, replaying every moment I'd missed, every warning sign I had ignored. Sarah was convinced she'd taken everything from me by ruining our future, but in reality, I was the one holding the secrets, secrets that could change everything. I remember watching her leave for the last time that day, her eyes filled with defeat. She didn't say goodbye properly. She didn't want to believe what was happening. I wanted to scream to tell her the truth, but I swallowed it all. I had to wait for the right moment when the truth would be undeniable. The hardest part was pretending to be okay when inside I was breaking. Every smile felt fake, every word a lie. I wasn't just protecting her, I was protecting us both from a storm we weren't ready to face. But deep down, I knew this silence couldn't last forever. There was something else buried beneath this disaster, something dark and dangerous. And I was about to find out exactly what. After Sarah left that day, the apartment felt empty in a way I'd never experienced before. It wasn't just the silence, it was the weight of all the things left unsaid between us. I wanted to reach out to comfort her, but I was caught in a web of my own making. I was holding on to a secret, and every minute I stayed quiet, the secret grew heavier. I spent that night going over everything again. Sarah's boss, Mr. Reynolds, had always seemed a bit too slick, too smooth with everyone at her company. But after the accusations, I started noticing strange things, whispers from Sarah before she disappeared into work late nights, hints that not everything was as clean as it seemed. I decided to dig a little deeper. It was risky, getting involved in something I barely understood and risking Sarah's fragile trust even more. But I couldn't stand by and watch her take the blame for something that felt wrong. I checked public records, company forums, anything I could get my hands on. At first, there was nothing, just the usual corporate jargon and fake smiles on the website. But then I found a few reports buried deep, subtle mentions of missing funds and irregular transactions. No one talked about it openly, but I felt it there, like a shadow lurking behind the polished surface. The more I uncovered, the more conflicted I became. Should I tell Sarah what I was finding? Would she believe me? Or would it just push her further away, convinced that the world was against her? I remembered how she looked at me the day she left, hurt, confused, betrayed. If I told her everything now, would she see me as her savior or just another part of the mess? So I stayed silent. I watched her struggle from a distance, feeling powerless but determined. There was more to this story, and I was going to find it. Not just to clear Sarah's name, but to protect her from the storm I knew was coming. At times, I felt like I was walking a tightrope, one wrong step and everything could fall apart. But I couldn't stop now. Whatever Reynolds was hiding, it was the key to everything. And I was the only one who knew it. I couldn't shake the feeling that something about Mr. Reynolds was dangerously wrong. Every time I thought I had hit a dead end, a new clue appeared, a small crack in the polished image he showed the world. It started with an offhand comment from a former employee I found through a forum. He mentioned vague, off-the-books deals and money moving in ways that didn't add up. I decided to dig deeper, spending late nights poring over financial reports and company filings, cross-referencing anything unusual. The more I searched, the clearer it became that Reynolds was not just careless. He was actively hiding something. Large sums of money vanished without explanation, contracts were signed with shadowy companies, and internal audits were conveniently lost. My heart raced every time I found a new detail. This wasn't just about Sarah's downfall. This was about exposing a criminal network that had been quietly poisoning the company for years. If I could prove Reynolds was behind the fraud, maybe Sarah could be cleared. But the more I uncovered, the more I feared what would happen if I exposed it. Reynolds had power, more than I understood, and the risk wasn't just legal trouble, it was personal. I wondered if he knew I was looking. If he did, would he come after us? The hardest part was carrying this burden alone. I wanted to reach out to Sarah, but every time I tried, the words stuck in my throat. I was terrified of what she'd think. Would she hate me for not telling her sooner? Or worse, would she think I was spying on her? I couldn't forget how fragile she was after losing her job and trust. I told myself I was protecting her by holding back, but sometimes I doubted that. I was trapped between wanting to save her and fearing I might ruin what little was left between us. One night, after another exhausting day of searching, I sat down with a folder full of documents I'd printed, proof, maybe, of Reynolds's crimes. I looked at the papers, then at the phone. I knew I was standing at a crossroads: stay silent and watch Sarah suffer, or risk everything by taking a stand. The fear was real, but so was the hope. Maybe this was the chance to turn everything around. But first, I had to be sure. I needed more than suspicion. I needed hard evidence. And that meant getting closer to the truth than ever before. I knew the stakes were higher than ever. The evidence I'd gathered against Reynolds wasn't just circumstantial anymore. It was enough to blow the lid off the whole operation. But the closer I got, the more dangerous it felt. Every late night spent digging through files was a gamble with my own safety. One evening, as I sat staring at the screen, a message popped up, an anonymous tip warning me to stop asking questions. My heart sank. Reynolds wasn't just hiding in the shadows, he was watching. I felt the walls closing in, but I couldn't back down now. Not when Sarah's name was on the line. I tried calling her, wanting to share what I'd learned, but she didn't pick up. Maybe she was avoiding me, or maybe she was trying to protect herself from the storm. Either way, I was alone in this fight. I kept pushing. The files revealed a tangled web of fraud, bribery, and cover-ups, all traced back to Reynolds. It was sickening to realize how deep the corruption ran, and how much Sarah had been caught in the crossfire. Then it hit me. The reason Sarah was blamed wasn't because she did something wrong. It was because Reynolds needed a scapegoat, someone to take the fall while he kept his hands clean. The anger welled up inside me. How could he do this to her, to us? I wanted to scream, to confront Reynolds face to face, but I had to be smart. The truth had to come out in the right way. I made a decision that night. I would gather all the evidence and bring it to the authorities. But before I could do that, I had to face Sarah. I needed her to understand why I kept silent, why I let her believe she lost everything. When I saw her again, her eyes were cold, distant. She accused me of not trusting her, of keeping secrets. I wanted to tell her everything, to pour out the truth and relieve the weight between us, but the words stuck. Instead, I held her hand and promised her I was fighting for us. That moment felt like a fragile thread holding us together. We were both scared, broken in different ways. But beneath the cracks, I felt a spark, a chance to rebuild. The web of lies was starting to unravel, and soon everything would change. When I confronted Sarah, I thought honesty would bring us closer. Instead, it drove a wedge between us. She looked at me with eyes full of hurt and disbelief, like I was the one who had betrayed her, not Reynolds. The weight of everything she'd been through made her push me away. "I don't know who you are anymore, David," she said, her voice cracking. "How could you keep all this from me? How could you let me believe I destroyed everything?" Her words cut deeper than any accusation. I wanted to explain, to tell her the truth, that I was protecting her, that I was trying to find the real culprit. But every time I opened my mouth, the pain in her eyes stopped me. She wasn't ready to hear it. Maybe she never would be. I felt helpless, watching the woman I loved drift farther away. The silence between us grew louder, filled with unspoken accusations and shattered trust. She began avoiding my calls, retreating into herself, and I didn't blame her. But I couldn't give up. If anything, her rejection made me more determined to prove her innocence. The fight wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about saving what was left of us. Late one night, I sat alone, questioning everything. Was my silence a mistake? Had I become part of the problem by not standing up sooner? The guilt gnawed at me relentlessly. Yet I knew I had to keep going. The truth about Reynolds had to come out, not just for Sarah, but for justice. I was ready to face whatever came next, even if it meant facing her anger and distrust head-on. This was our breaking point, a moment where everything could fall apart, or maybe, just maybe, where the fight for our future would truly begin. After that painful night, I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed help, people who could see past the surface and fight the corruption I'd uncovered. I reached out to an old friend, Mark, a lawyer with a reputation for taking on tough cases. When I laid everything out, his eyes widened, but he didn't hesitate. "We'll get to the bottom of this," Mark said firmly. His confidence gave me a flicker of hope I hadn't felt in weeks. Together, we started piecing the puzzle. I handed over all the documents I'd collected, and Mark began digging into Reynolds's history with fresh eyes. We connected with others who had been affected, former employees, whistleblowers too scared to speak out before. Their stories added weight to the evidence and painted a clearer picture of Reynolds's crimes. Meanwhile, I tried reaching Sarah again, but she remained distant. I didn't blame her. She was hurt, confused, and probably overwhelmed by everything. But I wanted her to know I was fighting for her, even if she couldn't see it yet. At work, I kept my head down, but inside, I was planning the battle ahead. Every small victory in the investigation felt like a step toward justice. Yet loneliness clung to me like a shadow. The woman I loved was slipping further away, and I feared I might lose her forever. One evening, Mark called with news. They had uncovered a series of transactions linking Reynolds directly to the embezzlement. It wasn't just rumors anymore. It was real, undeniable proof. I wanted to share the good news with Sarah, to show her the truth finally coming to light, but I hesitated. I wasn't sure if she was ready to hear it. For now, I'd keep fighting quietly, hoping the truth would be enough to bring her back. This wasn't just about exposing a criminal boss anymore. It was about saving my wife, and maybe saving us both. The day Reynolds's empire began to crumble was unlike any other. The news hit the office like a storm. Official investigations launched, his name splashed across headlines, and the board distancing themselves as fast as they could. I watched it all unfold, a mix of relief and anxiety swirling inside me. I remember sitting in my small apartment, phone in hand, waiting to hear from Sarah. I needed her to know that the nightmare wasn't over. Something bigger was finally happening. But when she finally answered, her voice was quiet, confused. "They said Reynolds is under investigation, but what does that mean for me, David? For us?" Her uncertainty echoed my own. I explained everything, the hidden fraud, the evidence we'd found, how Reynolds had used her as a scapegoat. For the first time in weeks, I heard a flicker of hope in her voice. Still, the wounds ran deep. Sarah struggled to trust the unfolding truth. She had lived through the shame and isolation of being blamed, and suddenly the world was shifting beneath her feet. Was she a victim, or was she just lucky to have me fighting behind the scenes? The fallout from Reynolds's exposure was chaotic. Some coworkers whispered about the scandal, while others avoided Sarah completely. But gradually, support came too. People who knew the truth or believed in her innocence began speaking up. We began to rebuild slowly amidst the chaos. The truth was out, but the damage was still raw. Sarah and I faced a new challenge, healing together after so much pain. That night, as we sat in silence, the weight between us felt lighter. We both knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time it felt possible. The boss's downfall was just the beginning. What mattered now was what came after, the chance to find each other again. After the chaos of Reynolds's exposure, Sarah and I were left with the quiet aftermath, a silence filled with things we needed to say but didn't know how. The truth was finally out, but it didn't magically fix what had broken between us. At first, our conversations felt awkward and fragile. We tiptoed around the pain, afraid to reopen wounds. Sarah was still guarded, her eyes searching mine for answers I wasn't sure I could give. I wanted to tell her everything, the fear, the guilt, the secret fight I'd been waging alone. But I knew words weren't enough. Slowly, we started to open up, sharing small moments of honesty. She admitted how lost she'd felt, how much she blamed herself. I told her how hard it was to watch her suffer in silence. Each confession chipped away at the walls we'd built around ourselves. There were setbacks too, arguments fueled by months of frustration and hurt. But even in those moments, I saw glimpses of the woman I loved, the Sarah who had fought through everything and still held on to hope. One evening, as we sat watching the city lights, Sarah reached for my hand. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. "I don't want to lose us." Her words were a balm to my soul. I squeezed her hand and promised her the same. We were both scarred, but those scars didn't have to define us. Rebuilding trust wasn't easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight. But we had taken the first step, facing the truth together, and that was more than I could have hoped for. In that quiet moment, I realized that losing everything was only half the story. What mattered was what we chose to hold on to, and for me, that was Sarah. Life after the storm was like walking on uneven ground. Sarah and I were no longer the same people who had faced those dark days. The truth had changed us, sometimes painfully, sometimes with quiet strength. I watched Sarah slowly rebuild her confidence, finding new opportunities and reclaiming her sense of self. She started volunteering at a community center, helping others who had faced unfair battles. It was inspiring to see her transform pain into purpose. For me, the hardest part was learning to trust again, trusting Sarah, but also trusting myself. I realized that keeping secrets, even with good intentions, had almost destroyed us. From now on, honesty had to be the foundation. We began to talk about our future, not the perfect future we once imagined, but one built on resilience and real connection. We dreamed of new places, new jobs, new chances to write a different story together. There were still moments of doubt, but we faced them openly. No more hiding, no more silence. One night as we sat on the balcony, Sarah smiled at me, a real, warm smile, and said, "Thank you for never giving up." I knew then that what we'd lost was never truly gone. It had simply been waiting for us to find it again. The past was a shadow, but it no longer controlled us.